I see the live, yeah.
Hey, welcome to the Many Savage Worlds podcast live today, episode 1. Uh, so we're going to be talking about setting and world creation for your home games if you want to write a setting, but more for the GM toolbox. We're going to start by introducing everybody, talk about ourselves, and then we're going to get into creating a little bit of a world for you. I'll save myself for last. So I'll introduce some of the people that are joining me today, some great guys. I'm just looking at my thumbnails at the bottom. I'm going to go left to right. So first we have John. Like to say anything about yourself, John?
Hi, everybody. My name is John Myers. I've been gaming for about, I don't know, I think since 1980. I had a friend join my group last night that's been gaming since 1978, and that kind of forced me to think back and look, how long have I been doing this? I discovered Savage Worlds about 3 years ago. Loving it. Came to it through a convoluted path, and these days I've been trying to get a following going in north central Connecticut. So far, I've only discovered one other fan out there, plus I've managed to convert most of my regular gaming group to it. So I've tried a number of different settings, currently running a Savage Greyhawk setting long term, and I just recently, this weekend, took a little break from it to do Ravenloft and Savage Worlds, and that was a great success.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being here, John. We're really happy to have you. Next up, we have Nathan. Nathan, you'd love to speak about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, I'm Nathan Carmen. I am. Some of you in the community may know me. I'm the founder of a little indie RPG company called Tricky Troll Games. We're a Savage Worlds licensee. We do mostly mini settings and racial supplements, just simple things like that. I've been gaming for about 10 years. Started in college. Gosh, that was 10 years ago. Yeah, and I'm just loving it. Found Savage Worlds probably about 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and absolutely have not looked back. So yeah, really looking forward to this. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nathan. Great to have you here. And as for your, some people know you. You're very popular in the Savage Worlds community, or at least Tricky Troll is. I'll say they have a great following. Bobby.
All right. I am Bobby Evans. I mainly run the GM's Table YouTube channel. In the Savage World, you guys would probably know it from the Let's Run Savage World series, where we do breakdowns of specific mechanics in the system to teach people and kind of have a resource to look up specific mechanics, as well as the small show that, still can't quite get off the ground, Savage It, which, Dan, you've been on, where we do something similar, where we pull a genre or a show out of a bucket and we savage it on the spot.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. I will say that the GM's Table is great. It's short format shows. They usually run 15 to 20 minutes, and I love them. I find myself watching them in my spare time. It's easy to just sneak one in. Really great content.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. We're still slowly growing, but it's slow.
Absolutely.
Doing laundry, Bobby.
I actually don't let my manager know, but I actually watch your videos while I'm supposed to be working for an insurance company.
Nice. Nice. Well, it's cool. This week we are going to have Deadlands Noir as what we're going to talk about this week. So there'll be some fun stuff.
It's excellent. And myself, so my name's Dan Cook. This podcast was my brainchild. I found Savage Worlds, I guess, a little less than a year ago still. I'd been looking for a new system. I was really fed up with what was out there that I knew about, and came across Savage Worlds through some podcasts and gave it a shot. Loved it. I've been DMing, GMing more than 15 years. Holy cow, I'm getting old. I guess closer to 20 years now. And so I'm an avid home brewer, and Savage Worlds really took to me like a fish to water. It's perfect for home brewing. You make your own content. It just felt natural. So because of that, I really wanted to share that with the community. I see a lot of people posting, oh, how can I run this in Savage Worlds? How can I run that in Savage Worlds? And I'm sure you guys, the other hosts, see it, and the listeners, the viewers, you guys see it. Or maybe you guys are the ones asking the questions. How do I Savage this? Or I want to run Savage blank. It's easy. It's simple. The framework is there. That's what Savage Worlds is for. It's for running whatever you want to run. There's a lot of really great license settings. I don't want to take anything away from them. The people who write them, the people who promote them, they're amazing. I run published settings. I love them. I buy them. I support them. But not to say that you can't create your own content if you want to run something that isn't already out there. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about is how to do that. Pretty simple. So for episode 1 tonight, because we had some time taken up by introducing the hosts, it's first episode, get comfortable with each other. We're going to be talking about Pulp. Savage Worlds is Pulp. Everyone knows that that's all Savage Worlds does, right? You can't do anything else, so you may as well talk about Pulp. So we kind of had this idea. We spoke, the 4 of us, about, well, what is Pulp? Pulp is more or less, it's high adventure, or high action, I should say, not really adventure. We like the idea of that sort of classic World War II Nazi fighting, relic hunting, for lack of a better term, very Indiana Jones. All right, fair enough. He's sort of like the Pulp icon at this point. So if, you know, say me or any of the other panelists here, your group came to you and said, hey, listen, we want to run a Pulp adventure. We want this Nazi busting, high octane, mile a minute. You know, how would we go about doing it? You know, would we have to go out there and go through the catacombs of published content to find someone who did it for us? Or would we be able to just sit down and say, you know what, this is it, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to run it? So, I mean, there's a lot of ways you can start. I know how I would start personally, but if anybody has any input, feel free to jump in. I don't want to hog the spotlight the whole time. But, you know, for me personally, when I begin to develop a setting, and once I know what I want to do, so if somebody said, hey, listen, we want to run Pulp, we want to run World War II, whether it's a one-shot, a small campaign, long campaigns, a little different. I think you guys could agree. It's a little different how you want to set them up. But more or less, the way that I find it is I want to familiarize myself with the world that we're going to be playing in. I want to know as much as I can. I'm a very free-form GM.
Same, yeah.
Right here.
Yeah, so I don't write down as much as other people may. I feel like once I know my world, I know what's happening in it. I just let the players decide where we go. So if my group came to me and said, hey, listen, we want to run Pulp and we want this. Excuse me, sorry. I would begin by saying, okay, what's the world we're going to be playing in? No, again, we discussed sort of this relic hunter style. I believe it was Nathan. You had what was the show that you had referenced?
So, Warehouse 13 is the first thing that came to mind. It's a modernized version of basically what Indiana Jones does. But if you're not familiar with it, they hunt down unusual artifacts that are always causing problems. You know, instead of your monster of the week, you have your artifact of the week, basically. They hunt it down and they bag it, tag it, and put it in this warehouse for safekeeping. And that's kind of the first thing I thought of was, oh, well, that's kind of like Indiana Jones too. It's a good place to start with inspiration.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. And I think that opens up the door for a really great mini campaign or even long-term campaign, more so than a one-shot. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little... Is anyone else getting the echo?
I hear it very faintly on your end.
On my
Okay.
end? Okay.
Yeah, it's echoing. I think it's echoing back through your microphone, Nathan.
That's why I've been muting myself to keep that.
Yeah,
So-
I've been trying to have good mute discipline too. Although it's weird not hearing like that background fuzz in my headset. Yeah, so Warehouse 13. I think it's great for a campaign or a mini campaign. You know, I like to do like ideally 5 or 6 session, nice short arc. Although I'm no stranger to the long campaign. But I think a big thing with the Warehouse 13 is deciding the motivation. Why? Why do we hunt the relics? Do we find ourselves being employed? Do we do it for this sort of love of knowledge? Go ahead, Bobby.
Oh, okay. Well, I was actually going to say Warehouse 13 kind of covers it perfectly, while, as said, it's like the modern Pulp. They're a government agency. And Warehouse 13, it's like a secret government agency, but even Indiana Jones, it's constantly the government came to him while he's teaching, we need you to do this. Having the employer just works really well for a MacGuffin of the week kind of setup.
You know what? Couldn't agree more. And I think for this particular sort of style, having a driving force, particularly an employer, probably the government, whatever country you decide to. Typically, we would say America as being American, but of course, I think Europe opens up some really great doors.
Honestly, I would love to see an English one where you're either like the Templars or the Legion from the Knights of the Round Table, and it turns out like part of their thing was collecting all these things. It started with the Grail and just kept going, and you just do a whole British themed one.
Let's do it then. Let's call that our framework, because that's what we're here to do, right? We're creating a setting, and as much as it is free form and say, okay, you know, how would you sit down and create it? But we're sitting down to create it. So yeah, we're going to talk about a English agency that is continuing to hunt down these relics since these sort of dark ages. They've been, you know, this prolonged thing, and they've made it all the way up to World War II. And of course, with World War II, you have the perfect antagonist, because who doesn't like to kill Nazis?
Well, yeah, and you have all that lore of the Nazis were dealing in occult matters and had that secret. Like it just writes itself for Pulp, especially if you're dealing with like magical artifacts.
She's performing right.
Sorry, I have some distraction. My fiance's I apologize. Yeah, so I think I mean that's sort of embedded in our pop culture, is that that sort of the Nazi occult connection, which I think is great. Do you have something to say, John?
No, I'm good.
No,
Yeah,
I just don't want to hug the spotlight. You know, feel free to speak up, grab my attention, and just, you know, tell me to stop talking. But yeah, the Nazis offer a great, again, because they're the perfect enemy, because nobody sympathizes with them. And they had this very pop culture-y, historically relevant, you know, they were doing all these evil things, and they were, you know, researching these dark arts, and they were trying to find that occult connection to give them the leading edge. Or even if you prefer to run it a little more straight-laced, which I think having the occult part is really a big thing in Pulp, is, you know, you want that over the top. But say a GM didn't, you could run it straight up, because they're still the perfect bad guy. They were still, you know, they were researching chemicals, and they were doing a lot of, you know, very covert things, very behind the scenes, top secret everything. So with that said, we're in England. I'm not super familiar with a lot of that sort of Bobby, you said the like Knights Templar and
Knights of the Round, Knights Templar, it all overlap. One of the great things of that is it's a coding. When you're dealing with Pulp, especially Pulp and Pulp stories and all, they deal in broad strokes. It's a flavor. If anything, you get to say the Knights Templar as a shorthand for a bunch of history you just don't have to write.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we're pre-60s, so like a lot of people, when you think England stuff, you think Bond, but you get to go pre-Bond, and it gives a bit of an advantage that you get to go World War II, pre-Pearl Harbor from a military angle.
Yeah,
you're also there. You're physically closer.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point too. Is that using the English connection is that you can step it up right to the very beginning. And you're not worried about, by the time America joined, I don't think a lot of people really make the connection unless it's something they're interested in, but it was the end. It was almost over by the time America stepped in, and we sort of just made that final push. So, I mean, we're able to step it back to the very beginning, that rise to power, which offers some great things. Step away from the Nazi connection a little bit. Not step away, but another really great thing I think is to look at the sort of the foreign lands possibility with Pulp. And this doesn't have to be outside what we're already discussing. You can travel to these wonderful, fantastic places, tropical islands, native indigenous people that have never seen, Europeans. There's just so much wonderful potential with something like that.
Go straight into the Sahara Desert, take on the desert fox. Maybe he was looking for some magical artifact hidden in a pyramid there, some part of the ancient Egyptian empire that nobody knows about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a great framework to come up with some wonderful ideas.
I definitely would see, especially if you're like leaning on that whole English bent instead of American bent, where a lot of the American pulp did a lot of South America and the jungles, and you just shift that to deserts in Africa, and it would work just as well. Again, it's a flavor. I mean, when we get into Savage Rules and the fact of trapping, again, it's a different coat of paint. Mechanically, you don't got to change a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely true. And that's really what it's all about.
I think I would actually start with, well, what's the mission going to be? Where are we going to send them, and what's the MacGuffin? And like you were saying before, having an employer to start would be an excellent idea. I think most of the time I kick off an adventure or even a campaign with somebody saying, "Hey, I need you to do this for me."
I mean, it works so well in Savage Worlds too. How many Pinnacle published settings have you working for an organization?
Yep.
Like it's almost a cliche for Pinnacle stuff.
From a design perspective too, it's smart because it gives the GM an easy in terms of coming up with plots, and also too it avoids the classic murder hobo scenario of just guys wandering around and doing whatever they want. You have a solid base and place to work from. That really seems to work. Yeah, you're right. Like absolutely, in Savage Worlds, I do it constantly. I do it too, all the time. Like it works really well.
But could we still meet in a tavern?
It's a pub. You're in England. Jesus.
German beer house.
Tavern called Casablanca.
Yeah, exactly. You meet in war-torn France.
Perfect. Yeah. So, John, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, where do you begin? Where do you really start? So we have a nice little world laid out where we want to go with it. So if we were going to put together a nice, what I usually refer to as a mini campaign, short story arc. So we work for the government, some branch, probably some clandestine branch. What's that one that James Bond works for?
MI5?
MI6.
MI6, yes.
Yes.
I would do MI13 just because.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that'd be too good.
Now, one of the questions that I have then is if this is where we proceed to is, do the PCs fall under military jurisdiction? Do we say, hey, all the PCs are ranked, structured, stamped with serial numbers, or do we sort of do this independent contractor style? or even a fair mix. I mean, I personally lean more towards the mix, but I'd love to hear what other people think about PC. I'm losing the word I'm looking for, but where to go with the PCs?
Like PC organization or structure, hierarchy.
Motivation too.
Yeah. Honestly, I would say if you want to stick true to Pulp, you could definitely have like being in the military as an option, but it's always been about the everyday hero that's almost a superhero. You got your Doc Savage, you got your Indiana Jones. Heck, even Warehouse 13 focused on 2 agents, but then they ended up folding in other people who were civilian that got folded into it. And that clash of having official government and non-government brings a lot of good conflict as well.
Yeah, well, and if you're not worrying about jurisdiction, it really it lets the heroes do whatever they want.
Yeah.
To an extent, which is also, I think, true of Pulp. Indiana Jones, for example, was not worried about diplomacy at all, when he's going wherever he's going.
Yeah, being an independent contractor gives them a little more freedom. I generally mix. Yeah.
your whole shtick is you go into other countries and steal their priceless historical artifacts. Your government's probably not avowing most of your actions.
Yep.
Well, I mean, having the military background doesn't necessarily mean that the government has to.
Well, no, I'm saying but the whole shebang were military.
Yep.
Right. No, like, I imagine it more of like that sort of all very clandestine. When you get caught and you cannot claim any. Right, you would not be able to pull rank on other militaries and throw your weight around, kind of thing.
Yeah. Plausible deniability is what you're looking for.
Pretty much.
Exactly. But I do think having the option for military personnel is good because that sort of makes sense that if the military was sending in a team, somebody would be sent into sort of like a handler situation.
Yeah. Get 1 or 2, have them either be looked at as the combat person or maybe the records keeper. You can have any sort of reason to have them there. There's a book you could write just on reasons for them to be there.
And if you're doing an exotic location, you could plant 1 PC as a native as well.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't necessarily be a military guy.
That's actually a perfect setup if you have someone for like a short arc where they can only show up for 1 session or something.
Yeah.
And be like, there, wherever we're going for the session, you can be there. You're the native for that location.
So something I'd like to add, and not related to what we're talking about now, but well, we just touched on, which is what brings it to mind. But I recently had an idea for running a campaign where I would have a set of regular PCs and then try to bring in a PC per session as a one-shot to fill in sort of this revolving cast. What would be NPCs, but have it played by an actual PC to give it that sort of flavor, which I think would be great for. Although the native could be long-term, hired on as the guide sort of thing. But where it was just mentioned, like, if someone couldn't make it every week, I thought that's a great idea, and I've wanted to implement it myself.
Funny enough, I actually have a buddy, Mike, who's in the ETU games and all of that stuff. He's running an ETU game where he had like 15 people interested, but only 3 that could commit, and he's doing that exact same thing.
Wow.
That's great. I'd love to hear how that works out for him, because that's,
you're part of the action, but you still, you don't have to feel bad about missing out afterwards. It's
Well, it's also Savage Worlds is a perfect game to try that, because if you're worried about, I didn't get XP because I wasn't there every time, the gap is to the point where a legendary edge is to get a novice wildcard because they'll survive with legendary players.
Yeah.
So backtracking a little bit, though.
Back to the fixer a little bit. If you're still talking Pulp and Indiana Jones, a good character to reference would be that one guy they knew from Cairo.
Mm-hmm.
I remember. I can't remember his name. He was played by the heavy-set person who had a beard a lot like Bobby.
Davies.
Yes.
Yes.
I can't think of the character's name.
So I think that allowing that sort of open cast of characters lends a lot to what you expect from Pulp. The philosopher, the academic type. Indiana Jones, as badass as he was an archaeologist.
Yep.
And that sort of sums up Pulp, I think, perfectly. Is like, somebody who went to college for a very long time and would spend most of his time with his nose in books, but now he's out here and he's just whooping his way through, well, pretty much everywhere he goes. So really perfect. So I think that takes care of PCs,
oh yeah. Well, actually, I was actually gonna say, like, if this is your first campaign, that's what the archetypes are for.
Yeah.
Other than like the mage, I think all of these fit in Pulp on priest healer. Like everything else works. You don't have to change a dang thing.
Yep.
So I'm a big fan of the archetypes. I like them. If I set up a custom game, I will build some to put them out there for the people to look at. To give people an idea of the kind of the flavor I want. I think it's more of my directing them in the right direction. Because I think as GMs, we all know that you tell people make whatever you want, and they come up with some really ridiculous things.
Yes.
So it's easier to rein them back in from time to time.
Yeah. And especially in today's environment where that other system is so popular and people are used to having something like a class put in front of them.
Yeah. Well, that's not even getting into frameworks, which is, the new hotness, but I think, honestly, archetypes are one of the biggest master strokes in the system, and it's not even super mechanically dependent, but we're going to have pre-mades, but they're not finished. We're going to give you 80 to 90% completed characters, so you still feel like you built them. They still feel yours, but most of the work's done, which is great for new players, great for, ones that want to be power gamers. It just worked so well.
Yeah, I think it's really overlooked. I don't hear people talk about them very much, and I think it's a great resource. So I'm a big fan of putting them together, and we don't have to sit down and discuss every template that we would build if we were running this Pulp campaign. But for GMs out there building their own world and creating their own settings, you may want to sit down and create some of these archetypes for your PCs. Leave some breathing room. Allow them to customize them. Nobody wants... or make pre-gens. I mean, if you're running a short campaign, 1-2 sessions, I run one-shots. Every one-shot I run, I create pre-gens. If you're running a one-shot, nobody has time to sit down for... I mean, Savage Worlds is quick, but let's be realistic. With a group of 5 people that you don't know, it takes 45 minutes to make characters.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, 45 minutes to make characters with 5 people you don't know is lightning fast.
Yes.
True.
Yeah, no. I think that, again, with that, before we move on, that's why the archetypes are so great, though, because most of, like, their pre-mades tend to be, like, the hindrances aren't filled out. And that's where 90% of your actual character flavor is. Again, one of those things that gets overlooked by new players, but hindrances is actually where the flavor of your character tends to come in, especially early game.
Yeah. Hindrances are so important. And I mean, I think anybody who is familiar with Savage Worlds can recognize they have to be personalized. Every getaway driver is going to know how to drive, and they might know how to pilot. Every archaeologist is going to have a small handful of knowledge skills. But what makes them human falls under the hindrances category. And I don't want to spend too much time discussing, how to interpret core, but it's very important.
I mean, the simplest way with your getaway driver, a getaway driver who's an alcoholic versus the getaway driver with one leg. Those are vastly different characters.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to sum it up. So with PCs decided, or sort of framed out for us, we have a nice little world, a setting. All right, we're going to put together
How about setting rules?
Yeah, so setting rules, I don't use a lot of them. I know there are some great ones, and they help make Savage Worlds feel unique. So I should be a little more in tune with them. Unfortunately, I'm not, but not to say that.
Yeah, I usually
They're
pick from the menu myself, but this last one shot, or it's actually going to be a 2 or 3 shot, I didn't run any of them. I have a modified version of Joker's Wild where I'm using the Taroka deck for
nice.
action. And I assign each character their own Taroka card. So when that card comes up, that's their Joker's Wild. They get a Benny, and it acts like a Joker for them, no matter who draws it.
Oh, that's actually kind of awesome. So someone else could draw your Joker, and then you get the effects of a Joker. That's a really cool idea.
I like that a lot, actually.
I do the lazy Joker's Wild, where the GM gets a Benny too, but everybody gets Bennies even if the GM draws a Joker. So I just don't have to remember.
And I would do that for a Pulp game.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I find that most people run Joker's Wild all the time. That seems to be the general consensus in the Savage Worlds community, that Joker's Wild shouldn't be a setting rule as much as just the standard. Not to say you couldn't exclude it for the right game. But so the other ones that come to mind, and I think everyone can agree, is see if I get the right names, because like I said, I don't use them very often.
I got your back. I got your back, man.
Yeah, I
so the one that I think of is Born a Hero. And Born a Hero is that you can take any edge at character creation. Sorry,
rank requirements.
Yeah, you ignore rank requirements. I will say Born a Hero, and this probably goes into something we'll talk about further down, is how accessible powers are in arcane backgrounds, because Born a Hero applies to that, which can really adjust your game. Because being like, especially a lot of the Pulp ones for Savage Worlds allow like weird science. With Born a Hero, you can have like a mind control gun at level 1.
Yes.
Which is great, but also you need to be ready for it.
That's true. There is something said to be controlling the power curve.
Well,
so what other people think about maybe different setting rules? Like, again, I like Born a Hero, but like Bobby said, a lot of that comes down to how you handle powers, which we'll probably get into after we discuss setting rules. I think that seems like the natural place to go next.
Yep.
Heroes never die is the first thing I always think of. Always. When it comes to Pulp, that is exactly what I think of, is heroes never die. If you're not familiar, it's exactly what it sounds like. Heroes don't die.
And neither do villains.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really important. Neither do villains, which is wonderful. I love it. I'll get you next time. I mean, it's classic. I would also make an argument for High Adventure, perhaps. I don't typically use it. My players don't feel like getting out the book. If you're not familiar with that one, you can spend a Benny to gain a one-time use of a combat edge. But that means you have to know the edges pretty well, at least your combat edges. So it's not typically used at my table. But I think it shows the classic hero's ingenuity kind of angle. The guy does the hero at the right moment does something he doesn't do anytime else in the adventure, but like pops out something awesome. I think it covers that pretty well. So I could see an argument for it.
Yep.
Oh, it's definitely pulpy. It's just about whether, to me, it's whether you have new players or veteran players.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Agreed. Mm-hmm.
And depending on the villain, fanatics.
Yeah. I'm actually one of those people that always feels fanatics should be an edge, like a villain edge. Because I will personally say I kind of hate that every villain can do it if you have the setting on.
Yeah.
I feel like it should be like a shtick for a villain.
Yep.
But no, yeah, it's so pulpy. It's so great.
Yep. Only a specific guy.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. And we've discussed that before, Bobby, when we did Savage It.
When we did Savage It, we did Jackie Chan Adventures. So me and Dan have already done Pulp.
It's true. A different kind of Pulp, though.
Yeah, it's Saturday morning Pulp.
I love that so much. So much nostalgia in that show.
Seriously, man, go back, rewatch it with the Savage Worlds goggles. It's perfect.
I should.
Talismans for powers. It's
so going back a little bit, I think Heroes Never Die is really great. High Adventure, I'm gonna have to agree. It seems like with the consensus of the whole panel it's really for advanced players. It's hard to run high adventure without people that really know their stuff. And I think if I ran a PC in a game with high adventure, I would have a hard time utilizing it to its full potential because it's really just a super advanced setting rule.
What I would do personally is it would technically kind of limit your players, but you could also go beyond combat edges, but just going at any of the test drives, because all the test drives have tables of the edges they allowed in the test drive with like the name and a single sentence for what it is. So then they have that, and it's like, these are the ones you can activate, because they have a really quick reference sheet, and we don't go into the fiddly bit when you're doing it with high adventure. We just look at that mechanic, and that's what you get.
That's really smart. I like that.
Yeah, I do think a cheat sheet is essential. And honestly, I use the which character sheet is it for my home group? The training wheels. You guys familiar with it? It's an older one, but it has a lot of information just packed onto it for new players, and it's really helped my group. It has all the combat options. It's great. Every little bit you can do to help your players know their options and know what is available to them. It really brings Savage Worlds to life because it's about what you can do more than what's on the character sheet. You know.
Yeah. Definitely advice: invest in at least one settings GM screen inserts, and just print those suckers off, staple them, and have it on the table.
Yeah.
I've never used them. I probably should. I
highly suggest Savage Rifts because it has a few things like disarm and trip in it that some of the earlier ones don't.
I have my Freedom Squadron coming.
Nice.
Shout out to Sean Patrick Fanning. Backed it. Super excited. I mean, it funded amazingly quick, so it wasn't even a question of whether or not we were going to get it. But hopefully, I know there's going to be some great content with that, and hopefully I can get a really great GM screen with that down the road. It's a ways away, but really excited. All right, so setting rules. I think that, I mean, we could use high adventure. Like we said, use a cheat sheet, print something up, put it on your table, have it there for your players. If you play online, put together a really simple PDF, or depending on which VTT you may use, put it in a notes section, make it available so they can pop it up, read it, and say, you know what, that's the one I want right now.
Yeah, probably have a caveat of like, know what you're picking before your turn. Don't be that guy where the waiter's at the table and you're reading the menu.
Yeah,
because that's my biggest fear with that. Yeah, especially with the cheat sheet, because then they're literally reading a menu.
Yeah, who is it? I don't know if anybody here listens to or watches the GM Hangout with Jared Gunning and the crew.
Yeah.
But they often talk about, and I can't think of who runs the game. I want to say Shane Hensley himself. When he runs a game, when it's your turn, he starts counting down, and if you don't answer quick enough, that's it. Like, he just moves right past you.
Yep.
Because he doesn't want that sort of oh, hold on, let me look, get my book out and flipping pages and what can I do.
The game's motto is fast, furious, fun. If you're not ready to play fast, get ready.
Yeah,
when
somebody
can't decide, I just say, okay, you're on hold.
Yeah.
Shut up. And you missed it, bitch.
I really like doing that. I really like doing that in chase scenes in particular.
Oh, definitely. I think.
Oh, yeah.
It's hilarious. The first time I did it, my poor group, I told them I was gonna do it, and I guess they forgot because I started doing it. They're like, "Wait a second, man."
One of my favorites is like, you don't even pay attention to whose card it is. You just start counting down cards. Where you go, Ace, King, Queen, Jack. Just keep going down. If they're not paying attention, eventually they'll be like, "Oh, I had this." Well, I guess you were on hold. What do you want to do?
Well, that's how they recommend it, I believe, is that you count down and you don't look around the table and say, okay, who has what? But I mean, let's say that this was the gaming group, us four guys. You know, if I was GMing and it was Nathan's turn to take an action, I mean, the other two PCs would have more than enough time to review a list of actions, think about where they are, look at a battle map. If I personally don't use them, but if there was a map, they'd be able to reference visually. This, players who aren't ready are doing that by their own choice.
Yes.
Or laziness. Maybe not a conscious choice, but it's their own doing.
No,
So,
I will say with new players, it can be decision lock because you have attack, wild attack, all your cold shots, movement. How many actions can I take? As many as you think you can pull off.
I had an 11-year-old at my last at my game, and he was a new player, and I didn't tell him the options. I said to him, well, what do you want your character to do now? I want to run up and stab through the crack I can see in the shutters. Okay, let's do it.
Oh yeah, that's fully what I support doing for new players.
You know what? I think you said it perfectly. I prefer to say to my players, I have my home group, and I play online as much as I can, but I run a home group with some friends I've had for a long time. And I run it as backtrack a little bit. So they came from D20, and one of them has been with me. We played a lot of Shadowrun. Shadowrun's a little more open-ended, but D20, as you guys know, it's all very, here's what you can do and here's what you will do. And there's not a lot of wiggle room in between. So I try to tell them, well, what do you want to do? And they'll look and they'll say, okay, I'm going to make this action and I'm going to use this edge and I'm going to do this. And I said, no, just tell me what you want to do. Do you want to run and step? And I have one guy who really gets it. He's my Shadowrun player. And he's like, I'm going to run and I'm going to, do a flip over like the hood I'm going to slide across the hood of the car. And when I land, I'm going to, stab him with the knife. And I said, okay, is that an agility trick or are you just adding that in for flair? And he'll say, okay, well, what's the mechanical? We weigh it all out and he'll say, okay, no, it's just, descriptive flair or, so I think taking a descriptive approach is perfect.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of bennies. You got players like that. When they do it without you having to probe them, they get a Benny.
Yeah.
Everybody will really quickly start going, oh, so that's how I succeed. Okay.
It's true. But we seem to be getting off on a little bit of a tangent about fundamentals, which is no problem. I hope people find it informative either way.
Well, that descriptive play will support the Pulp feel that we're on.
Yes.
So,
yeah, honestly, with Pulp, I was going to say, it's funny that it's not actually in the setting rules, but I would say what you tend to do, Dan, if you want a Pulp feel, you do the no minis rules. You don't worry about the battle mats. You don't worry about all that because Pulp doesn't really pull out measurements. Things can change on the fly to fit the story. Yeah. So the precision of a grid is almost antithesis of Pulp storytelling in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely true. But let's skip ahead. So that covers sort of the setting rules. So we got like some PC ideas, we got some setting rule ideas. We know where we're taking place and when we're taking place. We kind of breezed over earlier. Let's talk about magic, though. Magic's a big part of any role-playing game, no matter when you play or where you're playing, especially Savage Worlds, where they give you a lot of options to intermingle it with your story. So with a relic hunter type story, I mean, there is magic. We're talking about, all the way back to the Holy Grail, to the, Necronomicon, and, every other fantastic thing in between. But how do you incorporate that for the PCs?
If we're going World War II, if somebody really wants to play a mage type, I would direct them to either a mad scientist or a psychic.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Weird science, again, going off what they've actually put out for Pulp, seems to be the go-to for this kind of setting. Because your relics will have magic, but it's about whether or not your players have magic. And again, doesn't need to be the case for villains. Without getting back to the fundamentals, your villains can throw spells. But as far as the players, yeah. I think that, and then the psychic, because government experiments just work really well in that setting.
Yeah, so I agree. My question is, and I know how I feel, and I'll throw it out there. I don't know if people agree with me, and it's okay if you don't. But I personally would not allow my PCs to start with any magic. I think I would have to use a custom setting rule. I'm not sure how I would word it exactly. I'd have to sort of figure it out as I made my way through the process. But I would allow Well, I think it's kind of already there in the framework. You can use a weird science device without having weird science. If I remember correctly, you default off of how you're using it, or it's as an untrained skill.
It's basically based off the item.
Yeah,
Is how they word it.
I would run my magic like that. My PCs would not be allowed to take arcane backgrounds. Maybe psychic. I'd be somewhat open to that.
You can use the fantasy companion idea where the item itself has its own power points and it has a D8 in its usability. Or if you have to shoot it, you use your shooting.
Yeah,
and even then you can have stronger and weaker items that way and shift the D8 to a D6 or a D10.
Yeah.
It's actually a really good way to do it where you don't want magic in the actual player's hands.
Personally, I would probably honestly run it with same Dan. Like I'd probably do no arcane backgrounds at all. Reason for that being, at least in my opinion, it ups the mysticism of the artifacts. And makes those stand out more. They're going to matter more because, I mean, if a player gets a hold of one of those things and can actually do something with it that they couldn't normally do, it'll mean more, and it'll be something worth attaining, I think.
It's basically the difference between whether you're running something like Indiana Jones or something like Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
And if we're doing Relic Hunters, we're probably leaning towards Indiana Jones. And nobody in Indiana Jones could actually do magic unless you were a villain or you were going after the item that let you do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my villains don't follow the rules. I think that's a big thing with the villains, right? Is if my villains
that's a rule in the book. They don't have to follow any of the rules.
Right. If my villains can throw all the spells they want, and they don't need arcane backgrounds because they're the villains, and you don't get to see my villain's character sheet, so you can't tell me it's not there. I'm not to say I'm an adversarial GM, but I'm about the story. So if it's better for my story, for my NPC, my villain, my whatever to do that, then that's how my trap's going to work. That's how my villain's going to work. And that's just kind of my thought process behind it. And
well, there's also a bit of a structure thing behind it. Your villain's going to show up for a scene, maybe an adventure, or if he's an ongoing villain, like maybe 1 to 2 scenes every other adventure. He's only going to have the powers that are specifically appropriate for the story and moving forward. It's not the open book that player magic is. While mechanically it's the same, the implications and where it can go are vastly different. And I do think it's something that players who don't GM don't really realize because they see the numbers and forget if he only shows up in 1 or 2 scenes, that's a totally different game than you who are there every day in every scene.
Yep.
I'd like to say that's a really excellent point, Bobby. And I never really thought about it that way, but that really makes perfect sense. Is that your villain, giving your players that power is almost limitless to them at some point, whereas your villains, they, with the exception of like the ongoing villain, which even then they're limited by how adversarial you are as a GM. And if you want to kill your players as a GM, you don't need to bend the rules. You can just strike them down because that's
rocks fall, everyone dies. It's an old GM adage, and it's true.
For the ongoing villain, I generally, if I write down edges for them or powers that they specifically have, it'll be just to help me keep consistency from scene to scene when they show up. Most of the time these days, I'm not, don't let my players know this, but I'm not having sheets with NPC stats. And it's,
oh my God, he's the cutest fuck.
It's a benefit, and it also kind of hurts because Savage Rules has that, or Savage Worlds has that rule where you can take an NPC guide and hand it to a player when there's a conflict and say, okay, you run this guy for now. I can't do that a lot of times, I'm finding, because I haven't really got the stats here. I've printed out my brainstorm and I'm keeping it in front of me to help me move along, and I let my players believe that the stats are in that brainstorm somewhere.
Well, again, one of those beautiful things of Savage Worlds. Well, where's his character sheet? He has a D6 in what he needs to.
Yes. A D8 if he's an expert. If he's gonna fight some player characters, he might have a D10.
Yeah. Like the only stats that really matter, as far as numerically that will affect the game much harder than others, is what's his vigor, what's his fighting, because that's his toughness and his parry.
Right. Yeah.
And if it turns out his vigor doesn't add up to his toughness, he has Armor. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all very interpretive. Absolutely.
Leather coat.
Yeah. Oh, God,
Um,
the power of a leather coat. It fits every setting.
So, how would we feel? So, with our Pulp Relic Hunter, really need a working title, but we'll come up with that. So, how do we feel about the no arcane background? Treat everything as this sort of weird science. We'll call it relics for the sense of.
Yeah.
And I kind of like. I believe it was John. You said the Fantasy Companion. They have that. Each one contains their own die type, and we can adjust it. A powerful relic would have a really high die type, some sort of much simpler may have a lower die type or be more prone to misfiring, interpretive per item. I think that's a great way to handle magic for something like this, because everybody will be able to pick it up, make an attempt, and it could lead to some really great
we have to give them a reason to go after this particular relic, and we're thinking of ideas, powers to give it, and abilities to give it that will be useful in the end goal. So you've got the first goal of finding the relic, and then you're finding the relic for a purpose.
Yeah. And the beauty of your Indiana Jones government situation is you can actually make that relic as powerful as you want, because someone more dangerous than them is going to be taking it away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. The players won't have it for long.
Yeah. And when they do have it, they get to feel awesome, and that's their reward.
Right.
Because you can try things like Puppet. Puppet is an easy one of if the villains get it, everyone's screwed.
Yeah, I played in a Deadlands game, and somebody puppeted one of the players, and they didn't quite get to the point of making them kill themselves, but they tried really hard.
Well, Strahd tried to use Puppet to get one of the players to invite him into the house they were staying, and he could not roll above a 5.
Me personally, if we were going to run a relic hunt, the PCs are called into the government agent. They're told, "Hey, listen, we need you to go out and do this, for the Queen and the Crown." I would not tell the PCs what they were getting their hands on.
Oh, yeah.
A description, you need to find a chalice. It's a book. It's this very weird sculpture.
You keep the power mysterious.
Mysterious. One of the great things about having a headquarters is whether or not it's a research-based adventure, so that they then have to dig and figure out what they're about to go up against, which becomes its own part of the challenge. Is can you figure out what you're going up against so you can ready yourself against that?
Yeah, I think legwork's really important in the game. It's overlooked a lot, but I've heard some really great examples. I haven't used them as much as I'd like to. I run a zombie game, so there's not much legwork involved except for using them to run like hell. But I think they're really great. Like I said, I've heard some really good on-air conversation. I listen to a lot of actual play podcasts at work, and it really brings a nice flavor to the game. It makes the PCs feel a little more bought in. Gives them that buy-in that they feel like it's really a part of like what they're there for.
Now, I will also say this is a totally different way for artifacts, but another things to think about if you're making a pulp game, if you really want to kick it up a notch and you have other books or something, Super's Companion, pulp level, 5 power points. If you build an item that gives whoever's wielding it the effects of those 5 power points, it's nuts, but it doesn't tip the game so hard that it breaks it. I've actually found to be a really good sweet spot.
Yeah, 5 power points. That's what, plus 10 armor, I think.
It's plus 10 armor. It's regeneration, heal every hour, plus half time on fatigue. It's like a plus 2d6 heavy weapon with any melee attack. Like, it's things that's beefy, but it's not a nuke. It's not a missile.
And the nice thing is they sound huge. So your players are like blown away when they hear it. They're like 10 armor.
Yeah.
And they feel.
And then there's no activation. And no activation does two things. Now, again, this determines on how deadly you want it to be. But again, if someone else is trying to get it, the deadliness is getting to it first. Because if there's no activation, you speed up the game of you know what it will do. It will just do this. But also it means if the villain gets their hands on it, it's instantly a bigger threat. No, can he kick it off? None of this or that. It's boom, this has gotten worse.
Yeah, I really like that. Gosh.
Blake is now playing.
I will admit I fell into it when I was doing my Venture Brothers write-up I'm working on.
Yeah, I think tension is important in Pulp, especially something like what we're talking about, like relic hunting and the sort of the Nazis want it, the British government wants it, and it's a race to see who can get to it first. And you have to have that sense that time is of the essence. Otherwise, it's
well, classic Pulp. It's all about the race. You do have your big fight, but there's not much that happens after the item's actually in someone's hands, unless it's in the villain and you're trying to chase the villain. Like once it's in the hero's hands, Pulp tends to wrap up very quickly.
Yes. Because the item does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
So,
or doesn't in some cases.
Or doesn't. I think you just said a really important word when I think of Pulp, and that's the word chase. I don't think any Pulp adventure would be complete without epic chases.
Yes.
I know a lot of people listening are going to say, but Savage Worlds isn't very good for chases. And I can't say I don't totally agree. They're interpretive, they're difficult, and you have to find whatever works for your personal sweet spot in your game. I run chases. I like them. My players don't mind.
If you're used to the tactical chase, you're going to have a hard time with it. After a little while, after running maybe 8 or 10 or 12 chases, it becomes more fluid. And you're like, oh, yeah, I like this. I get it now. And the mechanics are sort of counterintuitive, but they click eventually.
Some of the mechanics have issues, and it all depends on how you set up the chase, because I think back to I was running a post-apocalyptic game where they were running from like a giant sandworm. And they got a card where there are normal range penalties, and somebody had a handgun and somebody had a sniper rifle. It was the same range penalty. And that's where I went, but it's some of the stuff you got to work with.
Yeah.
Now, I will also say I've been waiting for chases to bring it up. First and foremost, if you don't want to write your own Pulp, Rocket Nazis on the Oriental Express, but mainly because it has one of the best written chases in a Savage Worlds adventure I've ever seen. Nice. Because they have outcomes for like every club you can pull.
That's amazing.
That's always very helpful. Yeah.
That's amazing. And to add to the chase, what combines with the chase is having the chase in a really cool setting.
Now, I will also say, you can there's a trick I've figured out, and there's two ways to look at it. A, if you hate chases, just run a dramatic task. It's basically the same in a lot of ways. But if you want the chases to feel dangerous, this is some forward thinking. I wouldn't be surprised if those quick combat rules kind of come in and usurp that. Because you can just run a quick combat and flavor it as a chase, and you're good. And then you have your gunfire, you have the back and forth, you have worrying about it, and it takes very little work.
Yeah, and another thing, I mean, the chase, the dramatic task, and the social conflict, they all kind of revolve around the same general premise. So if you don't like chase, run it as a social conflict, and whoever achieves the most successes, they're the one who takes the lead. If you're doing a straight up, maybe not a chase as much as a race in that situation, I suppose.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of room to kind of wiggle and see what feels right.
The other big thing with those, and it's something people overlook, is look at how cooperative roles work. Because people don't have to be making driving checks to aid the driver. They can be making other checks. They can be making notice rolls. Maybe they're like, I want a firearm, but maybe it's just to distract them. So you make a shooting roll as a cooperative check for the driving. There's a lot of ways you can take that rule to really streamline chasing if you're having issues with it.
I believe that's right in core, is like as a passenger I'm going to navigate instead of if I'm not mistaken, that's right here in the deluxe book.
It is just people don't read
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, very true. I mean, most of that book is overlooked, which is a shame because it's really not that long. Yeah, so I think that pretty much covers. I think we have a great framework. If we were going to sit down and write an adventure and we were going to play it, I mean, I think we would know where to go with it, aside from the actual details.
Yep.
So, yeah,
With Pulp,
I mean,
it's great too because you don't need many details. It's a Nazi sergeant or Nazi general. What's his name? We'll figure that out as we go. What's the
Yeah.
MacGuffin? Because we left it mysterious, I don't have to know right away. And when you do the whole things of like, the legends were wrong, it really means you can make up the legends as you go and then give a different item once you get there.
Yeah, very true. One last thing I'd like to touch on. We're about the hour mark. I figure we'll keep this somewhere around this time length per episode.
Good, that's
so
why I
we can
told my
try
wife.
Yeah.
My girlfriend.
One last thing I would like to touch on before we go. We can keep it pretty quick, and then we'll do a quick sign off. And bestiary. So obviously we have the human enemy, the Nazi, as you said, the sergeant, the foot soldier, the the heavy weapons and tanks and all kinds of awesome things. But do we include the supernatural enemy? Do we include the King Kong on Skull Island? Do we include the Lizard Man hidden down in the depths of wherever you may end up? How do we feel about that?
Depends on the setting.
Yeah, I think in our setting it would work. I would want to note one thing. I know we glossed over you have the soldier and you have all that. Another part of the book people overlook because it's not the bestiary. You have your Nazis and you have like your Nazi generals in the soldier and the experienced soldier in the ally section. You're done on those. But as far as, yeah, if you go to an island, I almost feel like there should be some kind of giant animal. You do them as a wild card and you do one of them. Or if it's something like the Lizard Men, you have a king and a bunch of guys, but you do it for like one scene or one set piece. It's not boom, boom, boom everywhere.
Yeah.
And typically they're where the MacGuffin is.
Snapping.
Yeah, I agree. They have to be a plot device more than just a, I know it's a pretty common phrase, a monster of the week. That's not really what we're looking for. So,
No.
The Lizard Men are guarding this deeply rooted secret.
Yes.
Or
what it basically comes to when you're doing the versus Nazis things is you're introducing a third party. It goes from a race to a free-for-all because none of the parties are allied. Now, you could go like, oh, the Nazis are working with them and stuff. That starts getting convoluted for Pulp. Really, it's going, oh, they're here. Now they're here. And you can also do some good spins where it's like you think the Nazis are going to win and all of a sudden like, oh, the general has picked up the gauntlet of power and a spear goes through his chest because you're in the middle of a Lizard King lair. Like, that's when you use them, in my opinion, for a Pulp setting.
Yeah, I think the three-way tie works great.
Yep.
Because, it leaves so many, the party arrives on the island and the Nazis are already there skulking through the desert or the jungle. And, you're tracking them, you're going for a non-combat, you feel outgunned. But then along comes this, primitive, giant, God knows what kind of creature. Let's say the lizard folk. There's lizard folk there. And now you don't have to fight the Nazis. You can try to sneak past them. It just introduces more options. You can try to befriend the Lizard King. Good luck. But it gives you more options than just I'm going to stab him, he's going to stab me, I'm going to shoot him, I'll throw a grenade now. Okay, now he has a bazooka.
Yeah, it allows for double cross. I think one of the big ones, especially if you haven't run these kind of games, is to remember one is a competitor and one is a guardian. They have roles in this story structure because Pulp is all about tropes and story structure. Yes. And you don't want, well, now we're racing the lizard folk to get to it. Unless you did something or the Nazis did something to get them away and you're trying to get there before they come back, it shouldn't be a race. Just like the Nazis shouldn't already have it camped out and you're trying to deal with them guarding it. Because by the time they're guarding that supernatural thing, they are the supernatural force.
Yeah. It's true. It's true.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, so I think we've covered a pretty good framework. So I'll put this out to the panelists. We didn't quite discuss where do we go from here. We have an okay framework. We could always come back and talk about a specific adventure. We could sit down and frame out, okay, how would we run this? A, B, C, D. Here's how I'd run my campaign. Unfortunately, with 4 GMs, you're gonna have 4 different adventures. Not to say we couldn't work together and come up with something cohesive. Another option, I don't know how people feel about it. We could run a super short mini 1 hour. Like, here's what it would look like.
I am so down for that.
That'd be a blessing.
I like the idea. 1 hour doesn't leave us a ton of time, but it could be done with a little bit of pre-planning and some careful work. The other thing is we could always come back and talk a little bit more about it. We'll probably talk about this off air between the 4 of us.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
We'll figure it out. However, comment below and tell us what you think.
Yes, I was just going to say that. Anybody watching this, leave a comment. You can find us on Facebook, the Many Savage Worlds podcast on Facebook.
Drop some suggestions in the comments about the artifact, a location you want to go to. Types of hero.
Yeah.
Please, I would love to hear feedback. If you want to tell us that we're terrible, my voice is too nasally, you loved it, let me know whatever you have to say, because that's what it's all about. So again, Facebook, the Many Savage Worlds podcast. You can email me directly at the Many Savage Worlds. Sorry, I apologize. The Many Savage Worlds podcast at gmail.com. Make sure it's the Many Savage Worlds podcast at gmail.com. Again, if you're watching this, you're on our YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, let us know what you think. We want to hear back from you. And other than that, if there's anything else anybody wants to add, please feel free. I think I'm just about done with my little blurb. And I had a great time. I think it went really well. It was a blast talking with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, keep it savage, guys, and like I said, let us know if you have any ideas to add or anything you'd like us to talk about in the future. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've been running my mouth a lot this session. I hope I didn't talk over anybody, but yeah, I mean, this has been a blast, man. Any ideas you guys have, comment below. Also, yeah, I'm over here. Check out my channel if you are wanting to learn Savage Worlds or any of that stuff, or check out the episode with Dan where we did Savage It and we did Jackie Chan Adventures, because it was Dan couldn't remember Jackie Chan Adventures, but didn't matter because Pulp is that easy with the book.
Yeah. So I do want to say, yeah, check out Bobby's channel, the GM table. I lost it for a second. The GM table. It's great. Short episodes. You don't need to set aside this huge block of your day. Most of them are like 20 to 30 minutes, and it's great content. Nathan, Tricky Troll Games. I haven't read a lot of it. He sent me one. I haven't had a chance to read many others. I apologize. But huge following. When anybody talks about bestiaries, they talk about Nathan's books. How do I run this creature? It's Nathan.
I'll plug Nathan as well, because I looked up his item or his product list on RPG Now, and I think I own maybe about 8 of the products.
Oh, awesome. That's great.
I will be honest, this is alcoholic, so I can't remember what of yours I've read, but I do recognize the name, and I need to check it out because I have folders and folders of Savage World stuff.
And one last thing for John. Anybody in the Connecticut area that not even Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, that special part of New York that wishes they were Connecticut, reach out to John. He's trying to put together a great Savage Worlds community, local, in person. He's there and he's trying to do it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Other than that, thanks everyone for being here. Thank you for watching, to the people out there. And we'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
Sounds good.
Yeah, keep it savage.
Keep it savage.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye, guys.